What's gotten into these young girls wearing trousers? Do they think they can just ignore their place as a woman and go all unisex or something?
That's what happens when the idle vanity creeps in. Some young beau will catch their eye, and soon enough they'll be haltered and tethered to a household of young'uns, and domestic duties let them have their self-anointed glee. The reality of life will soon strike them and pop their fantasy bubble.
Yes, God's plan will set in. The whole picture of life's harmony will come to light. They'll fit into the part they need to play. It's been working just fine since Adam and Eve first stepped out of the garden.
I thought she was rather fetching.
I'll teach you how to fetch.
So, now Barlin comes into its own. The idea of who's to become our first representative?
Well, we'll have to see how the polls come in.
Sure we do, but I know who I'm voting for.
Well, thank you. The town's shaped up and done pretty well as a district since 1784. We've been blessed with the Reverend Puffer's sensible shepherding and the strong and learned guidance of our officials. Not much will change in the way of governing and carrying on with our affairs. Our main expenses are simple: roads, schools, the minister, and the poor.
It's a good thing we voted not to extend our bounds west and north to include even more of Lancaster. Our 4 school districts would have to be refigured, and the whole arrangement of the center and parish would most likely be changed to West Barlin.
I thought we were all pronouncing it Berlin.
That's what I said, Barlin.
Well, the true pronunciation would be Berlin.
Very true, if you were I Germine.
This new inn shines, and there's a store here offering almost everything that you could ask for.
Quite a building enterprise since Mr. Solomon Howe came over from Marlborough and took proprietorship of the Bullard House in 1903. He continued a modest store and tavern there, but when he bought old landlord Jones' inn and farm, his cunning as a businessman started taking his places. Owns most of Center because of it.
I remember as a young girl, many a nice gathering at Captain Samuel Jones' old inn across the street. That was Berlin's first inn, built in 1749. There was no place like it, but it needs some fixing up now and is showing signs of aging since Captain Jones' death in 1797.
You ladies should dine here sometime. It's gotten quite a reputation.
The steer tongue and tripe are exquisite.
Pig's feet and head cheese are what I'm all for. They're to die for.
The rum flows freely in these places. Good authority has it that 60 hogsheads of rum have been sold yearly in our town. That's 63 gallons each times 60.
Several winter town meetings have broken from our meeting house to reassemble at this inn.
No doubt to warm up.
Nonetheless, this is the place.
Content and proud of how our little town is taking on its own character while maintaining the Puritan morals and good sense of our forefathers.
Maintained, no doubt, by our dear Reverend Puffer. Blessed we have been since he came to our new parish in 1781 for his ministry and presence.
Quite helpful to a struggling parish through those impoverished years after the war with Britain.
Remember that old continental money from the colonial times? Became almost absolutely worthless after the war.
It seems like it took years for our US dollar to earn its value.
Back then, seemed everybody was poor.
We still remain a community remarkably free from class distinction, all nearly on a common level, each holding his own.
Elements essential to the perpetuity of a true democracy and a free republic, equality, fraternity, and true contentment.
Now there's talk of war. Those Brits still picking up our ships of trade and fishermen to force our men to fight their war with France and trying to enforce an embargo on our trade with France.
And supporting the Indians in their attempt to stop our western expansion. Dirty tricks.
Who's our Navy going to recruit for it? Our boys? They can't even swim. And they're going to put them on a ship?
They'll be seasick more than they can fight a sea battle.
I'd say build up the militia and let them come ashore. We'll give them a good whomping.
We don't want to distract Britain with more war. They've got their hands full fending off that devil-driven emperor, Napoleon.
Now, with good fortune that they are, if the French should trounce all of Europe, they'll be coming after us to reclaim American lands.
I say let it play out while we build a strong militia. We liked them before, we can do it again.
We should petition with our state's general feeling of negotiation and settle the whole thing that way. Fight if we're forced to, but only after all means of reasoning have been tried.
I'm afraid the glory of war may blind any good sense settlement may hope for out of Madison and the Secretary of War. I hear he's already setting quotas for recruits.
Stage is coming with the mail!
Seems you've lost your team.
Yeah, well, they've run off to Jonathan Merriam's for some feed.
I'm glad Squire Marion picked up the Berlin interest when the Barry to Boston stage first went through town in 1826. Well, that investment is costing him dearly, and despite the good services done for the town, it may never make a profit for him.
And now, in 1828, we have our first post office in the town, with Squire Merriam as our postmaster. Guess being captain of the cavalry gives him the desire to run a 4-horse hitch and become the first stage driver of the route.
A couple of years ago, he and his cavalry escorted General Lafayette when he was entertained at SBS Wilder's in Bolton.
Levi Pease from Shrewsbury started the first stage line in the country in 1794 on the Post Road from Boston to Worcester.
Also ran a mail line to Hartford and New York. Did well enough to distribute mail all over New England.
Poor fellow just died in 1824.
Well, I'd like to post a letter to Boston.
That's 6 1/4 cents, please.
6 1/4 cents?
Or you could send it post due on receipt.
Oh, no, it's just these 1/4 cents. I can't think. Here, you do the figuring.
This is great. We no longer have to go to Bolton or Northborough for our mail.
Remember before the stagecoach, having a market man bring the mail and the paper to Berlin from Boston?
Or the post rider would come in once a week and all the farmers and coopers would gather to hear the mail called out. I enjoyed that.
Esquire Howe's newspaper would often be read out to us before he even got it.
Mr. Wheeler, here's a letter for you. It looks important.
The stage line is much better than when we had those tape lines in the store nailed up to a post to stick our letters on, hoping some passerby would pick them up and take them along with him on his way.
Sometimes it would take weeks, and we still use it some different places off the stage route.
These wild cats! I'm ruined! The bank was fine with giving me a mortgage on my farm so I could start up a business of making wire. And now I'm told it's worth only half? Where's the difference? Vanished into thin air? It's not my responsibility. I'm working harder than ever to meet my obligations.
It's the criminal quips of the dandies and the politicos playing with our good monies and promises, grabbing at each other's dare and daring the others into speculations, till it all goes bust.
Well, it's our money and good promises they're cheating on us, and all they just say is, I'm sorry, you're only worth half of what we started with, so I'm afraid you owe us twice. Who's us? No one knew this had happened, and we're all in this together. It's just the way things is up. You know, the market, you know, it'll all work out.
Yes. After I bleed my knuckles to the bone and die of dyspepsia for their gambling games, these wild cats, I am ruined.
You guys gonna help me with this thing? Jonathan Merriam Esquire was born in 1789. He lived in a house probably built by his father, Levi Merriam. This was Paul and Mary McKelk's place now, across from St. Joseph's Church. The house was bought at auction in 1855 for the town farm, but proved not to be practical, and later sold in 1857. Much later, the house was known as the Berlin Hotel. Jonathan Merriam took a lively interest in town affairs, especially in the matter of roads and bridges. A stone that would cover a bridge or make a gatepost or wall abutment enthused him. Much of the stone and walls, the McKelks have nicely sculptured into the landscape, mostly, likely, originated by him, as the farm was all walled in. He also was guardian to orphans, one of whom was Reverend William Houghton of the Berlin Houghton history. Much of the facts stated in tonight's meeting are from that history, and some verbatim. When Reverend Houghton's father died in 1822, his home, while still a youth, was with the guardian Jonathan Merriam. Also, Merriam was representative to the General Court in 1827 through 1828. Sadly, his investment in the Berlin stage cost him, and he was obliged to sell his homestead, and he moved to a house on Pleasant Street. And just to acknowledge the true date of this financial disaster that we just dramatized, that was actually in 1837. And bloomers, which our young lady had on in the beginning, weren't introduced until 1850. But they seem best to fish here.
She is rather fetching. Now, you know, we had our old meeting house on the common, built back in 1779, and it really got to be a wreck in the 1820s. Had to do something about it. And as they looked it over, and they looked at some of the neighboring towns and what they've got for a meeting house, just had to have a new one. So in 1826, they pretty much tore the building apart except for the frame, and moved the frame on down to the farm on South Street, and made it into a barn, and built the new meeting house here on the common. And here it is. This is the building we're in. It was a lot different then, you know. Wasn't any ceiling here. Well, there was over here, because there was a balcony on this side. See these nice columns were under the balcony? And this whole part here was open all the way up to second story. And the main pews were down here, you know. And this was our meeting house, and the good Dr. Puffer actually dedicated it before he died. That was a great day. But then times changed. And, you know, it got so the ladies were starting to do a few things on their own. And they formed up an organization called the Berlin Female Benevolence Society in 1840. And they started having meetings at their houses. And they had, well, you know, after school the kids would come, to the meeting, and then later on, after the chores, the men would come, and they'd all have dinner together at somebody's. They'd have over 100 people. I'm told they had a meeting with over 100 people in that little house over across from the common next to the burying ground. Don't know how they did that in January, but that's what the book says. So anyway, they decided they needed a place to meet, so they met over in Academy Hall, upstairs over there on Linden Street, and they decided to build a room like that here in this meeting house, and they did that, and that's what this room here is. It got the name Central Hall right off. Don't know why they called it that, but that's what they called it. Right from the beginning, this was Central Hall. And when they redid the place, they put in the second floor, and they took the gallery columns from over the other side and put them in here, so they'd have the pair of them in this room. And then they built the whole thing upstairs. And you know, they built that big arch ceiling up there. Well, they had to cut the beams that held the building together. In order to do it, they made this big truss of wood and iron rods. Do you know Riley Smith is supposed to have done up a ton of iron rods to put in that truss? But it's held it up quite a while now. Yeah. But anyway, after all those changing, that happened in 1860. That was still in the time that we're talking about here tonight. And so that was pretty good, and it's still pretty good. By gosh, the place is holding up pretty good now. Now in 1831, you know, when they used to use the old meeting house for town meeting too. But when they built this one, I think the good Dr. Puffer kind of slowed them down on that. And they decided politics didn't belong in this meeting house. This was going to be for the faith and the faithful. And so they decided to hold town meetings other places for a while. And then 1831, they built a little townhouse out here out and back on the common. And they had that, and they used that from 1831 till for some years there. And that was the place to hold the town meetings then. And most of the political stuff went over there. But the formal worship stayed here. And there were a few other things that had happened. We had a hearse house built in 1805, and it was over here, just outside the meeting house. They moved it over at the burying ground. And you know, the town used to provide both a hearse for people, and, well, people's remains, you know. and they also provided coffins with the tax money. They made the coffins for whoever passed on, and provided burial cloths, and kind of helped out the families that way. Of course, you know, some of the families, they had a little more money, they'd go buy something fancier, but most of us made do with what the town provided. Yeah, this was quite a thing, and lots of things were happening here on the common in that time. But we were lucky to get this new meeting house then, and it's still pretty nice building. I hope people like it for a long time to come.
What's all this fiddle-faddle about center school? There aren't enough families with children to fill it.
What's all this brouhaha about a center school? Center has barely grown from 1784 until now, 1827. But they want a fifth of the school money to support it? Where are the students coming from? The 4 squadrons set in 1785 served the school of young folks just fine.
Yeah. First, the Friends Society were granted funds for schooling in 1803. That's continued, I guess justly so. Then annual funding for singing schools, first $30, $40, etc., since 1804.
And in 1823, they needed money to start a reading and writing school at the Bullard House. That place has been used for everything now, from a tavern to a school. Maybe they should start a school for innkeepers.
Or entrepreneurs.
Or fashion designers.
Yes, we'll all have tutors from Paris. Now,
In 1792, they sold the old dilapidated schoolhouses that the Bolton folks built over here years ago when we were part of the town, and built the 4 new houses of better style and convenience, which are serving us just fine for now. I say we vote no.
Here, here.
Just a note. In 1835, the 5th school district was finally voted in, and a center school was built. It stood on the lawn at the west end of the now town offices. And the town shortly after, where Berlin Memorial was built, tore the old schoolhouse down in the early 1950s.
We need to settle this church business and appoint a minister. And with due regard to the late Dr. Puffer's preaching, the puritanical fire and brimstone need to smolder a bit.
Dr. Puffer saw it coming. The Unitarian influence is causing great ecclesiastical schism all over these towns. He joyfully lived to see our new meeting house built, and then, thank God, died in time so as not to see the church itself rupture.
I wish we'd be over this church business and settle on a minister.
The liberal Unitarians' thinking will weaken the foundation of this church that was built on the truths and documents of Jesus Christ.
In order to preserve our healthy congregation and progress toward a beneficial future for all, one must brave a time to look at the flip side of the coin and tolerate some compromise as time evolves us.
I hate to break from Reverend Dr. Puffer's hopes for the congregation's future conduct. God knows He has given us strong and moral character, made us act in good conscience toward our neighbors. It's more in the way of running things that I wish would soften.
Why, even the Friends Society has loosened the strictness of their drab attire and formal way of speech to accommodate the impinging influences of modern times.
But they haven't diluted their doctrine. The gospel is the adhesive of our community. You are gnawing away at the very backbone of our civilizing fundamentals.
Ah, there you go. There's no talking with you. You don't listen to another man's point of view. You've either got it black or white.
The Lord's words are written in black and white.
Things change and better ways of mechanics evolve. People differ in their way of thinking how to run their household. Without consideration and a willingness to compromise with one another, there would be constant conflict.
Not in the church. There is only one Bible, and I suggest you liberals read it.
Well, liberal may be better than being blind and literal.
Well, the town may very well vote for Reverend Robert Walcott.
Behind the back of the church's will. If that's what's to come of it, we'll be forced to move out.
Perhaps the town may vote in Reverend Wilcott.
Against the good consciences of the church, we'll move out and see who'll be left for your good Reverend Walcott to preach to.
Well, the church did split, and in 1830, the Succeeders formed the Evangelical Congregational Society of Berlin and built a new church where the Warrens now live, around the corner on Route 62. The church later reunited here, and the Berlin Academy remodeled the Evangelical Church for school purposes. We'll now rejoin our players some years later.
are again for our end of the day coffee at the general store. It's become quite a tradition over the years. Good way to end the day.
Where's Fred Brewer and Roger Wheeler?
A number of small shoe shops have been springing up around town lately. Seems to be a lucrative business and likely to grow for decades to come.
The town's long been dotted with small shops for bottoming shoes. Seems nearly every other house has one. It's handy money to be made for your spare time, and women can join in the ranks of the trade.
No harm to that. They joined in the toils of farming for years, as well as the children. Good sense to learn the value of contributing to the solvency of the home.
And no fear of running out of demand. Everyone needs one.
I look forward to meetings we've been having over the many years for benevolent service. A refreshing break from a sometimes frantic household to join in good charity and friendly company.
I trust our sincere efforts were put to good use, not disregarded by otherwise heathen culture. I heard President Jackson had an army intervene and move their entire Indian population from the southern states.
An unfortunate necessity to prevent further bloody conflicts, but they are under the good guidance of the missionaries. Hard work evolving a congregation in unsettled conditions, but they've made great strides on the reservations.
These heathens have taken to Christian teaching quite well, becoming quite civilized, just like the Negro slaves.
Slavery. When are they going to abolish that antiquated practice?
When it doesn't pay.
Regardless, it's our Christian obligation to help someone less fortunate. After all, the Indians did guide and teach our forefathers to get a good foothold when they first landed on these shores. Our benevolent contributions are appreciated, I'm sure.
Years ago, we bought the old Spofford House at the north end of Crowderville in 1802 for the accommodation of these poor persons.
Fortunately now, that need is no longer so great as to warrant the upkeep of such a home. So the town sold it to the tanner Joel Gage in 1825.
And the dog tax since 1799 has long been used for support to households taking on the needy.
Let's hope we can continue united on a reasonably friendly basis.
Yes, not that nasty stuff we suffered till the reunion of the congregation in 1843.
If it weren't for the ruling of separation of church and state in 1833, taking the burden of ministerial support off the town and placing the responsibility in the hands of the parishioners, the division probably would have gone on. That caused enough financial trouble to get us back together and mitigate our differences rather than neglect each other's beliefs.
Well, we didn't take it to the ends of the world like those Millerites in 1843. However, few of our members subscribed to Miller's excitement and his prophecy of supposed Armageddon.
The day was fixed, and robed in saintly regalia, they assembled on a high hill, waiting all day for the trumpets to blow and their ascent to the mansion of the skies. When the day ended, they retired to their terrestrial abodes, wondering no doubt why the Lord had delayed his coming.
One misguided soul gave away his whole farm to join the frenzy. This will be no use to him after his elevation to a seat on high.
Imagine his woe, teetering at the edge of two worlds, realizing he had no place to go.
Yes, though we have our own disputes, it's fortunate our good reason can ground us practically and keep our feet planted firmly on this earth.
I've noticed a new tone in the town. People seem to be a bit more genteel.
It's Josiah Bride's Berlin Academy. He started teaching classes in Madam Puffer's house, then moved to the old townhouse in 1835.
He was a graduate of Marlboro High School. Then he was a popular schoolmaster at the South School and the Robin Hill School, which I'm sure added to his following here.
Since his changing the evangelical meeting house to an academy, the educational fever has spread even more. I've noticed my husband hasn't taken to the humanities, says he doesn't want to be outsmarted by the children.
Students are coming from nearly every state in the Union, some even from the Cuban Isles, for an education in the Berlin Academy.
Yes, he had to enlarge his boarding house facing the church across the street to accommodate the influx of students. Being coeducational, it must have been very tricky for that principal.
Mr. Bride keeps a practical reign of discipline with rarely instance of impropriety. The students all respect him dearly and attend strictly to their studies.
The town hasn't had such an uplift of intellect and appreciation for reason and goodwill since Reverend Dr. Puffer passed. Another man of fortitude and well-educated judgment.
Yes, our little town is worthy of good reputation and has reason to be proud. My country, 'tis of thee.
Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Where our fathers died, when of the pilgrims cried, from every mountain side, let freedom's reign.
If you'd all like to stand for a minute and take your seventh inning break, while I say a few words, that's fine. But so we'll just continue. If you'd like to stand, it won't bother me. I just wanted to say, the Victorian house directly across the street of Jane Sawyer's, that way. It once was a smaller two-story house. And the Berlin Academy bought it and greatly enlarged it and made it a boarding house for the academy. And much later, in 1868, it became the Belmont House as a hotel. And that burned in 1883. And thus, a new house was put up.
Wait a minute, Sonny, I'm coming.
Poor thing. I heard she was quite fetching when young. In her bloomers.
It's a lovely day for a stroll, but I'm coming down with a cold or something.
Well, oh, you know what? Try some of this. I heard it was. Yeah, wait a minute. It's some of Dr. Hodgson's new medicine. Cured my cough.
What's in it?
Some flavoring or something called cocaine. I think it means cocoa.
Thank you.
I got my own bottle. Join me on the bench? I think I might. I'm not sure. I got one. Well, mine's not as big. Dr. Hartson was quite a gentle and consoling doctor. He was very patient with me, caring for me while attending the birth of my children. Oh, did I howl. No other man could have held up through that.
He also attended respectfully to the elderly in their final days before passing.
The doctor had come quickly, in time when my boy broke his arm, bone sticking right out through the skin. He grabbed him firmly and reset the bone straight. He advised me, he's a strong boy and will soon be back to normal. Probably caused but more anguish to you than it did to him.
Pity his health failed, and he had to turn the practice over to Dr. Gott in 1854.
How much do you take of this? I don't know. Take it till your cough stops. Tastes good? Not bad. Well, Dr. Cott seems nice enough, and he's a graduate of Harvard Medical, you know. Dr. Hartson seemed to be doing fine with his medicines and extracts, and his sons are working with him now. He's putting up a laboratory and manufacturing shops in his house.
I have a lot of energy. I think that cough is well on its way out. Come on. Oh, let's go get some tea, honey. With a little kicker.
I don't have a care in the world.
A variety of religious thinking. In my opinion, it's become somewhat of a trend to treat religion more as a philosophy rather than the simple teachings of the Lord as it used to be. I hope the parish doesn't ignite into the pain it suffered before.
Yes, some 20 years later, you can still find hard feelings over that split.
Well, the Evangelical Society with stricter Puritan gospel has shared the Congregational Church with what is left of the liberals since reunited in 1843.
Since 1790, when the Friends Society built their meeting house across the line in Bolton, the Wheelers, Southwicks, and some others have gone to meeting there.
Although conflict with the Quakers has occurred over ministerial taxes and the right to their own school, the residents of Puritan heritage and the Quakers and those with other religious beliefs have held kindly regards for each other, with shared knowledge in regard to personal liberty of opinions and the harmonizing of religious faith.
Reverend Gardner Rice, as new principal of the Berlin Academy in 1855, began holding prayer and class meetings for the Methodist Episcopal Church. They've met in the hall above Riley Smith's blacksmith shop in Carterville, and more recently at the townhouse. I guess it's their constitutional right.
If we can temper ourselves to tend to our own affairs and let the other fellow be his own keeper, we may prosper better.
If only that would hold in my household. My husband always tells me and the children, my house, my rules.
Oh, my husband throws a tantrum of holy terror if he doesn't get his own way.
Well, my husband goes to the barn and consoles with his oxen whenever his domain gets threatened.
It's their mother's fault. They were doted on too much.
But what about those spiritualists? They don't seem to believe in God, but mostly just don't talk about it.
I think that most of them have faith in the golden rule and in the doctrine that whatsoever ye sow, that shall ye also reap.
But I hear they summon the spirits of those who have passed on. So let's join hands. Come on, come on. Close your eyes. Sway a little bit.
You devils! You startled the wits out of us.
Quite a conversation you ladies were having.
How long were you fellows listening?
Long enough to learn your regards to the running of the household.
Well, that was just women's talk. I'm sure you men discuss wives in a like manner. Nothing is meant by it.
The mill business has been very active lately. In South Berlin, Goddard's old mill from 1760 has prospered over the years. Too bad building that long dam busted him.
Several men have made a go of it since him. Besides lumber, they put a grist mill there, and now Whitney and Maynard have a leather pressing mill to go with their big shoe shop next to Maynard's house.
Another old mill from way back is the Pollard Mills in the west part of town. Big lumber business since they moved to the south side of the road with bigger slough and dam. The son's got a mill on the upper part of the stream too. Stephen Shepherd used to have a carding mill for carding wool there.
The smaller shops for manufacturing doors, sash, and blinds, like the one in the Coben Brook, below the road to the west part, they just haven't held on.
Avery Carter had some mills on Brewer's Brook. He was quite an accomplished carpenter. Built lots of houses in Berlin and even in Worcester.
Yeah. And old Peregrine Wheeler had his shingle mill at the end of the summer road on the brook coming out of Gates Pond. The dam and pond are still holding strong. His son Willard has a great lumber business on the South Berlin Mill Pond, and he's inventing some water wheels there. He's working on one that spins on its side.
Well, and further down the stream from Peregrine's was Amory Sawyer's mill for building sash and blinds.
Amos Merriam had that grist mill at the end of Carr Road.
John Wheeler's new Worcester mill on the South Street by the two bridges. Doesn't seem like it'll come to anything. Milling's an expensive business to get started.
Well, lumber's a good business now, with all the new houses built in the village in the south and west parts of the town, each with their own store, and Carterville too, here in the center.
Exciting times. Why, look at the way William Howe, now a bank president in Boston, moved this huge store that his father Solomon built to where it is now in 1852. He wanted to build a new mansion for himself on the old site.
I think there are 6 or 8 yoke of oxen used to roll it over here. R.S. Hastings is running a fine store here now.
So much growth, even in the cemetery. Why, we've been looking for a suitable place to have a new cemetery since 1849. Finally, in 1857, they found a beautiful and convenient piece of land in the south part of town and close enough to the road.
There's also such a buzz about the balls and the parties at the new hall above the South Berlin Union Store.
And the 1857 new schoolhouses are much more accommodating. The lyceums have been meeting in the south one.
Yes, and now that the women are joining in the debate, the exchange gets pretty heated.
Well, The point about woman's providence was well made. The man thinks it is necessary to hire a man to do it and has to help him with his labor. But the wife must economize while her responsibilities grow. She rises early, milks the cows, and gets breakfast, sometimes for several men, dresses the children, washes the dishes, skims the milk, turns the butter, sweeps the rooms, makes the beds, prepares dinners, cleans up, snatches an hour or two to sew, gets supper, milks again.
All right, you made your point.
Well, the women were put in their places about holding political seats.
We never esteemed to hold political office and would be embarrassed for our sex should such a woman compete there. But we could hold that seat equally well.
At the Lyceum, a man made the valid point to his debaters that God made Eve from Adam's rib. But due to the flaw and the crookedness of the rib, it surely hindered the ability of women speaking.
And then the woman reminded her male debater that there must be 23, just as crooked, left in Adam.
No, that wasn't in the man's favor.
Oh, that's right.
I need materials to make a dress for the young and old folks ball.
What are these balls like?
Let me answer that. As I was passing South Berlin on last Wednesday night, I saw from the hall a reflection of light. I stopped for a moment, and soon I was told that above was a ball for the young and the old. I repaired to the hall and halted a while and saw them marching in beautiful style. The number consisted of 80 or more. They were up and a marching upon the hall floor. The number soon swelled to 105, all wide awake, like bees in a hive. The march being ended, a sound from the fiddle filled the floor very full, each side to the middle. Graceful bowing and scraping from one to the other, of father and mother and sister and brother. They were the preliminary moves before they went further, which told the beholder they were happy together. Soon from the horn came a musical sound, which started them off with a regular bound. Then a tune from the horn, the musician did blow, which caused a quick motion of the head and the toe. A beautiful figure the ladies displayed, and Solomon too, in his glory arrayed. Thus the ball went along in beautiful style, until the trumpet informed them to stop for a while. Supper being ready just about now, we all went to Hastings, and some went to Howe's. The teams being ready, we loaded in squads. To the distance we found to be just 40 rods.
Just 40 rods?
We arrived there safely, all very nice, and sat down to the table as still as mice. We sat for a while in astonishing mood on viewing the table and its delicate food. Look at the cakes and the cheese and the beautiful pie. How good it must be, or the eaters did die. They ate so much. Soon Page came along, who stepped very gay, bearing fine oysters from Delaware Bay. The epicures all got an unusual fill. One had to take a big hygiene pill. When we returned from where we did start, he complained of a pain very near to his heart. Wow.
Oh, Dr. God!
It says the guy collapses, all freeze, but then the fiddle starts. But we all felt refreshed, much better than before, so we danced, and we danced, and we danced once more. The music was better, the best of any night. Improved, it was said, by the young Mr. White. So we danced, and we danced, and we danced twice more, until we grew tired and very little sore. So we marched, and we marched, and we marched once more, until the time seemed to be not quite up to 4. And thus the ball ended. Not feeling bad, we all started home, and some went to bed. I heard this expression from many, if not all, that this night's performance
Beats a calico ball.
And now, we're going to hear a few more words from Willard Wheeler.
Is this working? Is this working?
Yes.
I'm what's called the closer. So if you aren't asleep already, you may soon be. I'll try not to get too carried away. As you all know, this is about agriculture. As you all know, a gentleman farmer is one who only raises his hat. But we didn't have any of those in Berlin. I was asked to say a few words about agriculture. And like the rest of our farmers, which I happen to be one, we are all outstanding in our field. And so has been my family for several generations. Out here in the frontier, years ago, 1700s, and still in the early 1800s, a man with 100 acres, a few milk cows, some sheep for meat and wool, chickens, a hog or two, a horse for the wagon and riding and light cultivation, and a team of oxen for heavier work and working in the woods, could make a good go of it, and with the help of his wife and children, be nearly self-sufficient, growing a mixture of vegetables, potatoes, corn, flax, for linen fibers, oats and rye. Wheat doesn't grow well here. It has a rust. He would also need several acres of hay. In the early 1800s, here, some farmers in town were growing nearly 1 ton of hay per acre. variety of our soils renders the town suited for a mixture of agricultural uses. Rocky uplands, suitable for grazing, and the central plain and valleys, a sandy loam, good for cereals and vegetables. And most of the townspeople were farmers. Agriculture was, of course, the big thing in this whole town. Many of our town fathers would set aside time to spend at the plow or with their livestock to serve the management needs of the town. This done with little or no regard to fee and honorably so, being in good character and sense of duty to extend one's talents in the most, and in most cases, their brain, for the furtherness of the town's ambitions through which club or society or office. At first, most farmers marketed their own products. Then about 1800, market men came around to take the surplus of beef, pork, veal, poultry, eggs, and butter to market for them, creating an opportunity for more mixed farming practices. The farmer could spend less time with the concerns of marketing and more on agricultural production. And the frugal farmer could find himself in a thriving condition. During the close of the 1700s through the 1820s, hops was a plentiful crop. The town was producing about 6,000 pounds in a year, a good amount considering the town's population was 590 in 1800 and in 1820, 625. I want to take a little liberty here and say we still have a hop house in town. Most of you know this. It's across the street from Mr. and Mrs. Henry Wheeler's house on Sawyer Hill Road. And the hops house was used for drying the hops. You had to dry the hops to finish them off. And underneath that hop house, as on all hop houses, was a kiln. And it's still there. And I think the town would do well to be sure that that particular building, which is still there, and the kiln is protected for a long time. It's very interesting. If you've never noticed it, it's just right across the street, right next to the road. But the New York and areas west opened up, so did the competition for the market, and hops weren't so profitable here. I understand the hops production in Massachusetts, in Berlin, was second only in the state to Concord. And I was always told that the house that we live in, 232 Pleasant Street, it was owned by Mr. Johnson, and he built it on the money he gained from grazing hops. In 1840 to 1845, there was a great rush on a speculation on mulberry trees called Morbus multicoccus. And all the farmers, well, many farmers began raising a kind of, a kind of mulberry tree for feeding silkworms. Well, the worms and moths did fine, but the silk was poor, and so did the investors. The town's population in 1840 was around 760. A farmers' club was formed in 1855 Discussions were held, essays read, fairs instituted, and new methods adopted. I don't trust you, I saw you. Girls were bad news. Anyway, the first train railroad to the area was about 1850, going from Fitchburg to Boston. Now in 1860, which is beyond our time here, a rail line is open to Northbrook, making the city market better for local farmers. By plan, in the several years, this line should be extended through South Berlin and on to West Berlin. Now, we should. Wow! That train line It's obvious that the cast has decided that the quickest way to get to the refreshments tonight is on the train. You all better hurry up and get to the refreshments too, because this is the end of our show, but be sure to come to the next meeting and find out what happens after 1860.
We need to thank Bridget.
I couldn't have done it without my cast. I'd also like to acknowledge Eloise Sauls. She made the men's costumes. And Vera Munjum outfitted our fetching young lady over here. All right. Oh yes. We have some tiles at the back of the for the 1812 bicentennial. Okay. And we also have my shy nephew back there who helped with the stage props. Oh, and of all things, I'd like to. Joni Bergen did the store scene. And our violinist tonight, Eddie Dewey. Thank you all, and we have refreshments.
Thank you.
What you have here.